Hello and welcome to this video on tonight's video on the Confederacy. So this was published in 2017. Obviously, um, you know, you know, racism and the Confederacy kind of people who support the Confederacy, the people who are ignorant about it, has arisen since then. America doesn't exactly have the best place now, but so yeah, let's take a look at the Confederacy. As a history person myself, let's see what Americans think about the Confederacy.
Before our main story tonight, I'd like to do something a little different and just quickly tell you about a beloved icon of my childhood,
okay.
and it's this man.
For 20 years, he made the dreams of young people come true with his hugely popular Jim'll Fix It
Jimmy Savile. This'll be a long video.
program. Best known for his trademark jewellery, tracksuit, tinted glasses, and Havana cigar.
Now, I know it's hard to believe, but that bizarre-looking man, Jimmy Savile, was a national hero.
Yeah,
we
it
named
was.
places for him, we gave him a knighthood, we even put up this statue.
Now, I'm going to say this. I don't think knighthoods are good. So even if someone is amazing, I don't think you should give them a knighthood because they are representative of a time in which, you got a knighthood if you were really loyal and you helped make sure the empire stayed in power. That kind of thing. That's what you got a knighthood for. The only other way to get a knighthood was to be born into and all that other stuff. You know what I mean? So basically, what I'd say is I just think maybe Britain should abolish knighthoods. I wrote a story once where this person, they have their father gets a knighthood, and they unfortunately pass away because, they couldn't bear to live with the fact that they had actually warranted a knighthood. They were like, "What? No." And the point is, I just think knighthoods should be abolished. You know what? Maybe you wouldn't agree with me, but I'm just saying I don't think they're very good. So even if Jimmy Savile was the most amazing person in the world, then you shouldn't have given him knighthood anyway, because knighthoods are bad.
Statue of him, even though it clearly looks more like a cheese sculpture of George Carlin that someone left in the sun.
Yeah,
now, he had a show called Jim'll Fix It, where he basically granted wishes. And like many British kids, I actually wrote to him. I asked him to make me the mascot for Liverpool Football Club, and he never wrote back, which I'm actually glad about, because after he died, Britain began to find out who he really was, and the truth was horrific.
He's gone from a much-loved entertainer and respected charity fundraiser to a man described by Scotland Yard as a predatory sex offender.
Actually, interesting. Historically, there were a lot of people in power who were warned about him. For example, when he wanted to gain access to a children's hospital, people were like, now let's not give the grown man who is very, very weird, and we've seen him before bring children to his home and accommodation, and then the lights go out, so we don't know exactly if there's something wrong. There may not be, but let's not, put them in that situation. But what did you think the people in power did? They said, no, no, no. Jimmy wants to be put in charge of the children's hospital, so let's give him supreme access. Definitely. Problem is, that wasn't a stupid thing to do. That seems like a very dodgy thing. That means they kind of may have known, or at least were encouraged to ignore. So things like Margaret Thatcher, who, many people see as a little bit of a BNTCH anyway, but there's kind of strong connections with her and Jimmy Savile that might lead you to think they might be, connected somewhat, in the sense that maybe she may have, wanted to ignore certain things. Basically, there are a lot of things in the situation where you really have to consider when someone has a lot of connections, how do they have those connections? If they're not from a big background, if you're not from a rich background, if you're not from all this, then how exactly do you develop these connections? Oftentimes, like Jeffrey Epstein, for example, it's through more unsavory methods, So basically, they aren't, basically I would compare him similar to Jeffrey Epstein, not very nice man, but a lot of connections there and a lot of ability to protect himself, and that's probably why, even though people at the time were like, I think there's an issue here, like people would have said, people who were in children's hospitals were like, he is dodgy, you need to fix this problem, and then it would go up ahead, And then the people who were superior to them were like, no, we're not doing anything. So it is clear now he was, let's just say, meddling in political affairs as well. Margaret Thatcher, now it's come up that yeah, she's assisted him. So politics and politicians oftentimes have this weird connection to really disgusting and evil people. I don't know, maybe it's because they are too.
Jimmy Savile's headstone was here for less than 3 weeks. His epitaph read, "It was good while it lasted."
Oh, that is an unsettling thing to have written on his gravestone. Although, to be fair, nearly every famous epitaph would sound horrifying written on a sex offender's gravestone. From Dean Martin's "Everybody loves somebody sometime,"
Yeah, well, that's
to Rodney Dangerfield's "There goes the neighbourhood." Funny, but if he'd been a sex offender, not so much. The point is, Savile's headstone was taken down, as was that sign and that creepy statue.
Good.
Because once we found out that he was a monster, we accepted it was no longer appropriate to publicly glorify him.
Yeah, but that's the thing, and this is the thing that it's like, and this is I presume he's going to talk about this, and it's this weird thing where people are like angry at statues being taken down. It's like, well, you wouldn't exactly put up a statue of Hitler in Israel, now would you? Because that would be psychotic. You'd be revering a evil, insane person, a person so insane and kind of almost greedy that they were winning the Second World War, and then they were like, no, I want to make it harder. They deliberately made it harder. Like, the Second World War was basically a game to them. A game that got out of hand, and a game that lost a good few million lives. So yeah, basically, let's not put up statues of evil people, Let's just not do that. Like, it's one thing to be like, oh, I don't think this person is evil. But it couldn't be like, oh no, I think this person, they did bad things, yeah. But I don't think we should, harm history. It's like, why? I mean, they just want to rewrite it. No, they actually don't. What they want to do is not give evil people, like, the whole point is you're putting a statue that's a reward you gave to someone. If someone does great things, you go, look, we put a statue up. I mean, obviously they don't know, but we still put a statue up. Great. How nice of us to do that. That person, it's like a reward, whether you're alive or dead. It's a reward to you. The point being that you don't put up a statue of evil people.
Which actually brings us to our main story tonight, the Confederacy.
Yeah.
America's tracksuit sex offender. Now, in recent years, there has been a robust debate over Confederate symbols, from flags being taken down, to statues being removed, to the white nationalist rallies in Charlottesville, both the one that ended in violence in August and another one that happened just last night. So, as this debate is clearly not going away, we wanted to take a look at some of the arguments, because you don't have to look hard to find people very upset at the idea of Confederate statues being taken away.
You can't change history. You can't.
Once again, they don't want to change history. They just don't want to give evil people a statue, because that's how you give a reward to someone. You see, once again, you wouldn't have put a statue of like that. I have to ask Americans, would they like to put a statue of, let's say, Stalin in front of, Congress, the Congress building? Would they put a statue of Stalin? A couple others, I don't know, Xi Jinping, they would like to put a statue of him as well, Because, I mean, they're all major parts of history. They had a real effect on the country. For example, Stalin, massive difference if someone else was in power, massive difference, had a massive effect, on the world. That's a real key part of history. But most Americans wouldn't really see him as a good person. The problem is, when you start defending statues of evil people, it makes you sound like you don't think that person is evil. And if that is the case, it makes you sound, when that person is a slave owner, and their whole point is that they wanted to protect the right to keep slaves, that you kind of agree with them, and that means you want slavery, and that means you're evil too, and that means basically,
can't pick and choose what you decide is history.
I think I'll just leave them alone.
Once again, you don't pick and choose with your history. You pick and choose what you decide to revere. So, for example, I wouldn't really agree if an Amy de Valera statue was put up in my country because, well, he's a horrible man who was basically a dictator and just wrecked the entire country. Now, of course, some people might be like, well, no. Yes, he did do all the things you're saying, but they may not think that they're bad things, you know? Because, see, I don't think stripping away women's rights, like stripping away just women's rights, I just don't think that's a good thing. But other people, let's just say they're not too opposed to it.
Alone and leave them where they are, you know. They're part of history.
I just don't think we can erase our history.
It may not represent the best idea that anybody ever came up with.
Keeping slaves, yeah. Yeah, wanting to fight a war so you can keep slaves, that tends to be a bit of a dodgy one, yeah.
But nevertheless, it's part of our history, and I think it should stay there.
Once again, Hitler's part of your history too. You know, loads of figures that Americans hate. Well, not all Americans. Some Americans do love Hitler. You know, strangely, for some weird reason. I mean, I don't know why Hitler would have hated Americans. I mean, you know, they're not even, they're not Aryan. But you know what I mean? Like, basically, you know, you don't, it's the statues thing. It's not, you're not talking about removing them from history books completely. You're just saying, let's not revere them, you know, but like, you know, let's not do that.
You know what, I'll give him this. He is right that the Confederacy and everything that came with it is, to put it mildly, not the best idea anybody ever came up with, because that, of course, is making grilled cheese on a toaster turned sideways. That is a billion-dollar idea that is also completely worthless. But they're also right about one thing. We should remember our history. So tonight, let's do that. And let's look at the unique heritage of these symbols, starting with the fact that there are a lot more than you might expect.
The Southern Poverty Law Center found some 1,500 Confederate memorials across the country.
1,500. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of statues. I mean, at that point, like that's less than one statue for 1,000,000 people. For a group of terrorists and traitors. I mean, that's just weird at that point.
More than 700 of them are statues and monuments, and 10 U.S. military bases are named for Confederate officers.
10. Right? I mean, once again, I find it highly unlikely that they'd name a U.S. base after an American enemy that the whole country was behind.
Officers.
Think about that. There are US military bases named for Confederate officers, and they were the enemy. They killed US soldiers. That's like finding out that Nancy Kerrigan named her child Tonya Harding. Why would you do that? That's a weird choice. And tributes to the Confederacy are everywhere in the South, and notably some in the North too. And that map doesn't include kitschy ways that the Civil War is presented, like at this family restaurant.
Dolly Parton's Dixie Stampede brings a rip-roaring taste of America to life. Dixie Stampede is a musical extravaganza of sight and sound, centered around a friendly North-South rivalry. Friendly servers bring the delicious four-course feast right to you, including a whole rotisserie chicken and all the Pepsi, iced tea, or coffee you like.
So
yes, that is a Confederate soldier serving a small child all the Pepsi she likes, which is still, remarkably, only Pepsi's second worst ad campaign. And the thing is, if you grew up with experiences like that, it can seem like the Civil War is just a friendly rivalry, a fun, colourful part.
Rather like the rivalry shown in the other Pepsi commercial. You know, just a rivalry where Many people died, and one side wanted to keep people. In fairness, though, it's not like the North wanted to, make it like a world, like a socialist world. So, effectively, they both wanted to be horrible people. Just, I think the people who wanted to, keep people as slaves were, they could be described in basic terms as evil. You see, sometimes you have, bad people and bad people. You know the phrase, it's not black or white. It's like, they're both pretty bad people. But in this case, there's a clear sign of who is the worst. Also, the South is basically just like the North, except the South want to have the addition of, slavery and, basically a lot of extra evil stuff, So it's not like it was like the South wanted to have, some good policy, but then that really, really bad one where it's like, yeah, you really slipped up there on the whole slavery thing, didn't you? No, they were just really, really bad to begin with. No offense meant to people who are from the South. It's just that's just the facts. Just not very nice.
Part of US history, but that omits the key fact about the Civil War. The Confederacy was fighting for the preservation of slavery. And that's not my opinion, that is just a fact. There are many ways that we know this. Slavery is mentioned in multiple states' declarations of secession, with Mississippi saying our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery. The Confederate Constitution contains a clause enshrining slavery forever. And then there's the speech Alexander Stephens, the Confederate vice president, gave in 1861, in which he articulated the basic principle.
You know what's interesting, though, about this is that they don't necessarily say slavery in just that. They also specifically make it really racist. They're not like, oh yeah, you're white, you can still be a slave. They're specifically targeting people who are not white. So it's just like, you're not only for slavery, but you're for racist slavery. Interesting. Yeah. Right, yeah, okay, so weird policy there, Really weird.
Principles for the Confederate nation.
Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition.
The superior race? Ooh, where did we hear that before? I mean, Nazis and Nazis again. Yes. Very Nazi-like. Once again, the weird thing is that it's like slavery, but in addition to that, it's like racist slavery. It's like you're not saying, oh no, slavery is fine. You're saying slavery is fine for specific people. It's like, oh, okay. So you think it's wrong for someone who's white to be enslaved, but not if they're not? But, I mean, how do you... It's like when people are like anti-Semitic, but also religious. It's like, but how are you against a religion when you are not an atheist or agnostic? Like, where is the processing there? Oh, yes, no, that religion is wrong. But my religion, which has even less evidence of possibility of being fully accurate, no, that one's right. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. How? It's just psychology. Basically, it doesn't really make any intelligent sense. Like, even if you give one point which is wrong, it just doesn't really work. So basically, you're very, very evil.
Wow. Subordination to the superior race.
Yeah.
That is explicit. If the Confederacy was not about slavery, somebody should really go back in time and tell the fucking Confederacy that. And yet, remarkably, many people think the Civil War was over something else.
When people were asked, what do they think the main cause of the Civil War is, 48% said mainly about states' rights.
Yeah, I think it's more about the specific thing that, they wanted to keep slaves, and that's the right that they kept. They were allowed to they wanted to be allowed to be keeping slaves. So yeah, states' rights.
Only 38% said mainly about slavery. 9% said both.
But wait, what do you mean both? Like, surely if it's about slavery, it would be about states' rights, or I mean, it is slavery, you know? Like, the whole thing is so that they can keep slaves. So you can either take a wider look and say states' rights, but the whole thing being the right to keep slaves, or you can say it's the right to keep slaves. It's not both. It's keeping slaves. Also, neither? What do you think it was about then?
And that is amazing. Only 38% thought the Civil War was mainly about slavery. In other words, look to your left, now look to your right. Statistically, all three of you live in a country where only 38% of people think the Civil War was mainly about slavery.
I don't live in America, but it's too expensive.
And on that states' rights argument, for the record, the southern states were ardently pro-states' rights, but with some glaring exceptions. Notably, when northern states passed laws to help protect runaway slaves, the South wanted the...
Oh, yeah, no, their states' rights. They weren't. That's the thing. It's a very selfish kind of thing. It's like, we don't want, people to enter our country. Other countries, they need to, they need to fix this problem because we're not bothered about, not invading other countries and then causing conflict. It's like, well, maybe you see. And I know this might come as a shock, but okay, so you're saying you don't want people entering your country. But then why are you going on holidays and why are you emigrating to other countries? Well, and why are you profiting off of those other countries? Because it seems to me like you're perfectly fine with going to other countries yourself, profiting off those other countries. But as soon as people try to come to your country, you're like, no. Basically, what I'm saying is, I think there should be freedom of people. I just think, if you're going to have a system in which you're going to be like, I think, we should have borders. Yeah, but then other countries would have their rights too, but you don't accept them though, do you? Countries like England, for example, or the European Union. You're like, you are in other countries effectively stealing, and then you're like, oh no, you're not allowed to enter our countries, but you effed other countries up. Or even if you didn't, you went into their countries and you profited off them. So, it has to go both ways. You took resources from them. Better accept people. Anyway, basically, I just say this. They're very selfish. So just, the states' right thing, yeah, it's specifically about specific states that wanted to keep slaves. If you didn't, then no, your rights weren't allowed.
The federal government to override those states' laws. So they loved states' rights as long as they were the right states' rights.
Yeah.
The wrong states' rights would be states' wrongs which would need to be righted by the right states' rights. Look, to put it really simply, they just wanted to own black people and they didn't much care how. That's a fact. But that's a very hard fact for some people to accept.
Why, though? Why?
Especially if a member of your family fought for the Confederacy. And sometimes the understandable desire to want to distance your relative from that cause can lead to people distorting the cause itself. Yeah. Just watch as one man at a community meeting in North Carolina defended a Confederate statue by talking about his family history.
My great-grandfather was a Confederate soldier, and I was proud of that, because my opinion of his fight was for his rights. I don't know what his rights were.
What? Yeah, and many people in the English aristocracy can trace their ancestry back to slave owners. A lot of them profited directly off it. The royal family, for example, all that wealth they have, that's from stealing from other countries. So you see, the thing is, actually, Elizabeth can't. No, actually, Elizabeth lived through a time when she still would have profited off it directly. Yeah. Basically, the new members of the royal family, like the children now, most of them, well, with the exception of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and all the islands they own, their territory is sunk a little bit down so that now there's less responsibility for them to be like, well, all of this. But they do have to take into account the reason they have that much money is because they sacked other countries of their wealth. Basically, to put it this way, the thing is that how would I put this? It does matter what you view your rights to be, because if it's to disregard other people's rights, for example, once again, like borders, if you're like, oh, you're not allowed to enter our country, and that's our right to tell you so, but it's like, well, then you're kind of subverting that person's right to freedom of movement. So that's not really your right when it goes against their rights. You know what I mean? Same thing with the prison system. It's like, well, it's my right to imprison you, but it's against their rights to be imprisoned. So, I'm just saying there are a lot of things you can't just argue. Well, it's their rights.
I wasn't there. He was dead long before I came along. But I'm really concerned.
So he doesn't know what his rights were that he wanted to keep. Then, if you don't know what they were, then dodgy.
About our monument, I want it to stay. It reminds me that I got a little rebel in me.
Do you?
We all want to kind of be independent. We all have a little rebel in us, even the ladies.
Oh, just straight up sexism. Yeah. Who would have known that someone who wants to keep a Confederate statue would also be sexist? You're going to keep the racist statue and the person who wants to own slavery statue. They want to keep that, but they'd be really sexist too. Imagine that.
Ooh, even the ladies. Hashtag feminism, hashtag Confederacy. And look, I don't know why his great-grandfather fought. It is hard to know the motivations of any individual soldier. What we do know is that, again, collectively, they were fighting to preserve the institution of slavery. And I honestly get wanting a more comfortable history for your family. But in doing so, you can't invent...
The thing is, I probably have ancestry that fought, in the War of Independence or something like that. And they probably killed a few people. Probably. I'm just saying, I'm not going to defend their actions of killing people. It's just, you do have to take into the fact that they wanted, some of them wanted to kill people who were not necessarily in the opposition of them getting independence. That's the kind of thing. Like, some people did just murder individuals. So, you do have to look at the movement and go, well, why did you join the movement? Because, I would be a bit concerned if it's like, oh, you joined the Confederacy for what? If that was something that they wanted, I guess that'd be a good thing, but that's not what they want. I'd be concerned for someone who's like, yeah, I joined it to make America more accepting of the workers. I don't think that's what the Confederacy are up for, actually. I don't think that's what they're up for at all. They seem to be more about slavery, so they maybe made a mistake there. Although, sometimes people join the wrong movement.
Invent a more comfortable history for your country.
Yeah.
Because you would be erasing the actual painful experiences of many Americans, as a fellow North Carolinian explains.
When I walk by this statue, it becomes very painful when I think of the suffering that my ancestors went through. They enslaved people, abused people for their own economic impact, and it should not be celebrated.
Yeah, we'd be like putting up a statue of Jeff Bezos, for example. A fellow who looks on at his work as being abused in a very sadistic way. Because it does seem a bit like sadism. Like, why not make the areas smaller? That way people don't have to walk as far. And you could hire just more workers. All sorts of things. And in some cases, some of those things aren't even going to cut into your profits. You just redistribute workers and give them cubes to work in. I mean, it might require a little bit more engineering for their like machines, but like, come on, there are ways to avoid overworking workers like they do in those fulfillment centers, that they call them. You know, there are ways. It just seems like it's kind of intentionally sadistic. You know, I'm just saying, it does seem that way. And the point is, you're exploiting people. And if I saw Statue of Jeff Bezos in the middle of saying that was straight, I'd be like going, yeah, okay, that's yeah, no, you shouldn't have that there, you know.
By these statues.
Right. And that is the harsh reality of what was done by those Confederate men. And yes, even the ladies, #Confederacy. And if you want to see a perfect crystallization of what happens when two people have wildly different views of the same symbol, just watch this local news clip.
Why do you carry that flag? Because this is my heritage. My family fought to save their farm under this flag. Who was working that farm?
Oh, that is a good, tough question.
Yeah.
And the news clip actually cut out there, but we were...
Yeah, like, yeah, we wanted to save our farm from what exactly? Like, I know this might come to, but how exactly does the Confederacy save your farm? If it is yours, you know, unlike many countries where the workers do not own the farm, so presumably you're not the worker, you're the owner, then, you know, but if you do own it, then where's the saving of it? I don't see where the Confederacy would be too prone to the saving of your farm. Like, how was that your heritage? Like, yeah, they...
We were so intrigued to find out what his response was, we tracked it down. And whatever you are expecting, you're going to be surprised.
Who was working that farm?
My
family was. Who was working the farm? They were poor. Do you know how much a slave cost back then?
Jesus Christ! That's so good. Yeah, that's something else, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, that's something else. How do you know that now? It's like, well, you know, when great-grandpapa, he wasn't able to buy a person, so he had to work the farm himself. I know, he was too poor to buy a person. Oh, it wasn't like now, where you can just rent them out, you know, pay them dirt cheap. Back then, you needed the monies to buy people. You know, it cost you money for some weird reason, whereby you were effectively paying somebody else for someone else's labor. Very weird. You know, it's this weird thing where it's like you're paying somebody else. It's not like the person is free. You're just not paying the person. So you're actively just evil. Like, couldn't you give that money to the person? Maybe. I don't know. That might work, you fucking moron.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Whoa! You know you are in the wrong.
Yeah.
When you decide your best argument is screaming at a black man, do you know how expensive you used to be?
Yeah.
It is comments like that one that landed this guy on the cover of Holy Shit, that is not remotely the Point magazine.
Yeah.
And look, that is clearly an intense example, but denial of this painful part of history can take many forms. Look at PBS's Finding Your Roots, where Henry Louis Gates explores celebrities' family histories, and he often finds some shit. Famously, Ben Affleck pulled strings to get the show to remove all references to his slave-owning ancestors.
Oh, come on. Ben. Doesn't he, like, play Batman? Come on. You play a rich fella who most likely abuses workers. You know, come on. You don't... You know, you don't... If you start pulling those kind of strings, it makes it... yeah.
And though he later apologised, that impulse right there is not good because it sanitises history.
Like, here's the problem. If you don't like people learning about your slave-owning roots, just don't go on the show. You know, they call you up, they tell you what they found out. You go, you know what? Don't air this. Don't air any of this. Let's not keep the slave-owning roots in. just don't air any of it. Because there's two choices here. You either just don't do the show, or you show the stuff.
And while there is no easy way to respond to learning that kind of horrible information, it is worth watching Anderson Cooper find out how one relative of his died.
Boykin was murdered by a rebellious slave.
Good.
Wow. Your ancestor was beaten to death with a farm hoe.
Oh my God. That's amazing. This is incredible. I'm blown away.
You think he deserved it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, he was a slave owner. I like the fact that he can say, yeah. He did, yeah.
Wow. You know what? As a general rule, just try not to live a life that could lead a descendant of yours to one day say, a guy smashed Grandpappy's head in with a garden hoe? That's amazing. Great job, that guy.
Yeah.
But my absolute favourite response to a nasty surprise undoubtedly comes from Larry David, who received a real 1-2 punch.
Are you telling me that my great-grandfather fought for the South in the Civil War? What? Are you kidding? Oh, my goodness. I hope no slaves show up on this.
Please turn the page. Now, Larry, this is another part of the 18th.
Oh, you did it! You did it! I knew it! I knew it! Unbelievable!
Unbelievable.
Boy!
That's unbelievable.
Oh, boy, oh, boy.
Yeah. Pretty bad. And look, Larry David is not responsible for what his ancestors did. None of us are. I have to believe that because I'm English.
Oh no. Well, actually, John, the interesting thing is that you can actually say, interestingly, this is a bit of history for you. In Georgian times, oftentimes the soldiers in England were not actually enlisted by themselves. They were kidnapped, shoved onto ships, and told, you're going to fight. So interestingly, the British Empire in the Georgian times had soldiers based effectively off kidnapping its own people. So they would go to a bar, they'd see a bunch of drunk people, and they'd just collect them up, shove them onto a ship, and then when they're out in the sea, they'd be like, yeah, you're on the ship now. Get to work. So yeah, a lot of people at the time. So technically, there are certain people throughout British history that may not necessarily have been necessarily a bad thing for the imperialistic machine, but may not have been the ones driving it. Although, in fairness, there were a lot of racist things in Britain. So, if you're defending them, yeah, you're not exactly going a good route there.
And I would like to go to an Indian restaurant again at...
Oh, yeah. Or just, like, pretty much most of the world.
Some point in my life. But we do have to reckon, personally and as a country, with what our heritage means. You can't ignore it like Batman. You can't say it's something else like town meeting Santa. You've got to actively, painfully come to grips with slavery and the lasting benefits and disadvantages that it conferred in ways that, frankly, we haven't yet. And that actually brings us back to Confederate monuments, because there is something about them that symbolises our reluctance to have that conversation, and that is the dates that they went up. Because while some initial memorials were built mainly in cemeteries shortly after the Civil War, the real surge came much, much later.
The Southern Poverty Law Center says a majority of the more than 700 Confederate monuments in public spaces across the country were erected decades after General Lee's surrender.
It's true.
Yeah, actually, interestingly, it's in with Confederate supporters. Now, let me tell you an interesting story. Once upon a time, I was watching this British show. So this was a British show where basically this character is a lawyer, and basically they've been hired by a person who's got a food truck, and the person who's got the food truck wants to force another person out of the food truck because that person's just moved in. Now the thing is, the person with the food truck has a Confederate flag behind them in the food truck on the side of the road. Now, I'm sorry, but if I was ever driving away in a car, or in the back seat of a car, or in the passenger seat of a car, or in a bus or whatever, and people were like, "Oh, we'd like to eat. Sure, we'll stop at this thing." And I was to look at that Confederate flag, I would be like, no, I'm not buying from this place, because I do not know what they've done to that food. I'm not saying they've done anything to the food. I'm just saying, even if they haven't done anything to the food, it's not a good sign when you've got basically a slave flag in your back, like on that back where I'm looking at it. It's like, there's the friar, and there's a Confederate flag. Okay, bit weird. You're English, right? So maybe you don't know what that means, but you really should. Because, ooh, if you do,
As this chart of the years that they were dedicated shows, there was a big spike from 1900 to 1920 as white Southerners were reasserting their dominance through things like Jim Crow laws, with another spike in the 50s and 60s as the civil rights movement was gaining steam. So those statues weren't so much commemorating recently fallen dead as sending a pretty hostile message to African Americans. And sending messages is kind of what statues are often for. This one says, "We love freedom."
From France, but yeah.
This one says, "The most notable thing about our city is a fictional character." and this one says, "About yay big." We still don't know what he was trying to measure, but whatever it was about yay big.
Yeah, well, I mean...
But, look...
I mean, like... a box, maybe? Who knows?
For some Confederate statues, though, the intent is crystal clear. In that town meeting from before, the statue that they were debating was this one, which went up in 1914. And a leader of that county's chapter of the KKK gave a speech at its dedication, calling the occasion an opportunity to recall the achievements of the great and good of our own race and blood.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Which, again, is pretty on the nose right there. And the largest Confederate memorial, the carving on Stone Mountain in Georgia.
Also, interestingly, it's very interesting when you've got racists talking about their own race. It's like, well, there's only one race, the human race. And it's one thing, like, I understand putting people into races when you're... when they're being discriminated against. That kind of makes sense, because it's like, well, you are a group of people. You could put you in a group. Obviously, you're actually not your own race, but when you're the people being racist, it just makes you even more racist to be putting yourself in your own race, because it's like, but you're not being discriminated against, so you're being wrong. Factually wrong. And it's best not to be discriminatory and wrong, because where's your argument? Exactly?
Is located where the 20th century KKK was born. It depicts 3 Confederate leaders on horseback, and it was completed in 1972. So that means there is colour footage of the dedication.
After nearly half a century of work, the memorial carving here at Stone Mountain is finally finished, and officials are calling it the 8th wonder of the world.
Are they? Wow, I wonder what officials they are. How is it, like, even if they weren't Confederate leaders, how is that the 8th wonder of the world? It's a human carving in the side of a mountain. It's been done before, and it'll probably be done again after this. But it's like, but how is that the 8th wonder of the world? It would be an 8th wonder of the world if that was like if it was natural. Wow, that's amazing. But you did it, and it took you half a century apparently. So I'm just saying, number one, it's super racist, and also, it's also not that cool.
We must recall those principles of loyalty, dignity, and honor that shine through the lives of men we commemorate today.
Yes.
I'm not saying that every single occurrence of so-called treason is a bad thing. But it's very weird not to put in a little bit of thing like, yes, at the time they were fighting the US government. They were technically traitors, but you kind of implying you forgive them for that. And wow, interesting people to forgive.
That was Vice President Spiro Agnew commemorating the loyalty of literal traitors.
Yeah, like that's the other thing. Like, why would so when you intern someone in Guantanamo Bay and they're not guilty, that's fine. But when there are literal slave-owning psychopaths who want to keep slaves, and then you commemorate them, and you're the vice president of America, the country they were fighting. I mean, one person is completely innocent of a crime you imprison them for. Another person is very much guilty, and it was a very horrible person. But even if they weren't a horrible person, they were still your enemy. So, they did fight against you. The other person did not. So yeah, just saying, very weird people to forgive.
But what can you really expect from a man whose name, rearranged, spells grow a penis?
No.
And here's the thing, some monuments went up even more recently. I want to show you one that was erected on private lands, but very much for public consumption, because once you see it, you will not forget it.
The statue was erected in 1998. It portrays Nathan Bedford Forrest on his horse, gun in one hand and sword in the other, surrounded by Confederate state battle flags, visible for all to see on the side of I-65. Forrest was a Confederate general and an early leader of the KKK.
That is just objectively terrifying, regardless of context. He looks like if a nickel did cocaine. So some of these statues commemorate people who fought a war to preserve slavery, were erected to assert white supremacy, and were dedicated by Klan members. And yet, there is a blanket defense that tends to get offered by people, and not just people, also this guy.
They're trying to take away our culture. They're trying to take away our history.
The culture of enslaving people, the history of enslaving people, and also they're not trying to take away that culture or history. They're trying to not have it, revered and, put there. So yeah, I don't really think that statement is correct at all.
Okay, so that argument is taking these statues down obliterates history, which is clearly just ridiculous.
Yeah.
First, monuments are not how we record history. Books are.
Yeah.
Museums are. Ken Burns' 12-part miniseries are. Statues are how we glorify people. Or, in the case of one in Tokyo, how we glorify giant radioactive lizards. And yet, the president's concern seems to be that tearing down statues leads to a slippery slope.
This week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week? And is it Thomas Jefferson the week after?
Well, first of all, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are founding fathers. The Confederates are not. They are literal traitors. And also, would that be a very bad thing? I mean, they kept slaves too. Also, that's a massive difference between a traitor and, someone whose entire purpose for fighting was to keep slaves, and a hypocrite. It was like, we want freedom for us. For the people who are slaves, no freedom for them,
You really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop?
Okay, well,
where does it stop? What? I mean, we can't have any policies then, we can't have any laws, because where does it stop? So that means, if someone wants to do something, I'm just saying, like, you can't have an argument of, when does it stop? Next thing, they're going to be killing real life people, toppling them, and breaking them into pieces by pushing them over. What's going to happen after that? It's going to keep going on, isn't it? Forever and ever. Never stopping. Or maybe they'll just try and knock down the Confederate statues.
I'll tell you where it stops. Somewhere. Anytime someone asks, where does it stop, the answer is always fucking somewhere. You might let your kid have Twizzlers, but not inject black tar heroin.
Yeah.
You don't just go, well, after the Twizzlers, where does it stop? And the same is true of Confederate monuments. Think of it this way. All people, living and dead, exist on what I'm going to call the Hitler-Hanks spectrum, from bad to good. And at some point on the spectrum, monuments to honour people are going to be inappropriate.
Yeah.
Although, to be fair, it does get tricky around the middle, where, of course, you'll find Adolf Hankler. And look, there are clearly people deserving of statues who are imperfect humans, and sometimes our standards change over time, which can then get tricky because you're judging historical figures by modern standards. But for many Confederate monuments, especially those erected well after the Civil War, valorising the cause or leadership of the Confederacy, this really isn't a close call. This is your babysitter showing up in a Jimmy Savile t-shirt. I don't care what you think that represents, you're not staying home with my fucking kid tonight. And for Robert E. Lee in particular, it's actually even easier because of this.
Interestingly, Robert E. Lee was once asked about placing memorials at Gettysburg in 1869. The former general replied, "I think it wiser not to keep open the sores of war, but to follow the examples of those nations who endeavored to obliterate the marks of civil strife."
Yes, that's a smart thing to do. Not always a good thing to do, but smart. You know? Although, in fairness, he is a fella who wanted to keep slaves, so maybe, you know, it might be best for him to be like, yeah, no, I think we should not accentuate the fact that we were traitors and we wanted to keep slaves. I think that maybe it's best if, you know, maybe people in the future won't necessarily want that, and then they'll be like, well, why do we have this? We just literally fought a war of it. You know, basically, wouldn't look too good. But, you know, that is what a lot of countries do. Not always a good thing, because it can mean they oppress their citizens and destroy history. Britain did it in India, for example. A lot of history destroyed. There are various places where, like, empires are, where a lot of documents were destroyed mysteriously sometimes. You know, and it's a bit weird from time to time. It's just like, I'm not sure about that. You know, it's just tends to be the case. People who do bad things tend to like to obliterate the fact that they did bad things.
To commit to oblivion the feelings engendered.
Yeah.
It's true. Robert E. Lee was opposed to statues of people like Robert E. Lee. So any city that decides to keep a statue of him should at the very least add a speech bubble saying, you know, I told you all specifically not to do this. So what do we do now? Well, I would argue that nothing is not acceptable, and trying to paper over the cracks can actually make things worse. In the 1990s, Richmond tried to fix its Monument Avenue, a street lined with statues of Confederate leaders, by adding African-American tennis legend Arthur Ashe to it. And you can't just give Confederates a black friend and say, we're good, right?
Yeah, it's a good one. Like, I'm not racist, I've got a friend who's... It's like, I don't know, that's not an excuse. You can't just... Yeah, no, because I've got a friend. So it makes everything fine. I don't think it does, actually, because, yeah.
We're good. Arthur's up there. You love Arthur. So if we really want to learn from and honour our history, perhaps the first step might be to put most of these statues somewhere more appropriate, surrounded by ample historical context, like in a museum, where people go to proactively learn about history and also to punish their children.
True.
And please, try not to think of this as a loss, because it's actually a real opportunity. And I'll show you. Please, come with me. Because if and when a plinth becomes empty, that is actually a huge chance for your area to honour someone who really deserves it.
Yeah.
And I have some ideas for replacements that I would love to run by you. First, Beaufort County, South Carolina. How about a giant statue of Robert Smalls here? He was born into slavery. He stole a Confederate boat and he sailed it to freedom and later served 5 terms in Congress. This guy is amazing. Atlanta, Texas. You are the birthplace to Bessie Coleman, the first African-American woman pilot. Why would you not want this in your town? She's incredible. Now, Florida, you might not want an individual, but how about something that honors what your state represents? Something that says you've got a little rebel in you. So I give you this statue of your official state reptile, an alligator giving everyone the finger. He's called Herman, and he definitely says Florida, while also having nothing to do with slavery. And finally, there is Charleston. And to you, I say this: why have a divisive Confederate statue when instead that pedestal can be filled by your favorite son, the actual Stephen Colbert?
Oh. Stephen Colbert. Not a Confederate, anyway.
Who will stand up there all day telling you fun facts about your wonderful town. Right?
Yes. Yes. Charleston. Charleston is the site of the first free public library in America.
That's fascinating, Stephen.
Every year, we host Zugunra Fest, the Southeast's most comprehensive migration.
Is he running off teleprompter?
Focused birding festival.
That sounds incredible. I'll Google it. See, Charleston, you can have this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I need to do my show 5 days a week.
5? How?
I don't know. Oh, we're also Travel and Leisure's #1 U.S. destination for the last 5 years running.
Come on, Charleston, you can have this in your life.
You want it, though.
That's our show. Thank you so much for watching. See you next week. Good night.
Yeah, that was last week tonight. Do go ahead, look at them. Lot of videos coming out. You know, generally one every week. Sometimes they do take a week or two off. But you know, so yeah, go ahead, check them out. There'll be a link in the description. Yes, that was basically a look at the Confederacy, Jimmy Savile, and Stephen Colbert. So yeah, that was it. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you next